I never imagined my own son would hit me in the face in front of 200 guests for refusing to hand over a $950,000 company that I built with 40 years of sweat and tears. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, because we have new stories every day. Leave a like and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. My name is David Harrison, and at 67 years old, few would have suspected the size of the abyss that would open up beneath my feet that May afternoon. If I close my eyes, I can still hear the echo of the bells from our little town's church. The whole town was talking about the wedding of my granddaughter Sarah, the apple of my eye, the smile of my old age. I thought it was a blessing. But that same day, I would discover that blood can be the worst of betrayals. When I looked at the clock that morning, I felt the weight of 42 years dedicated to the family business, Harrison Metals. Every dollar earned, every machine bought, every worker hired represented sleepless nights and days under the sun and rain. I did it for my family, for Michael, my only son, and for Sarah, the girl who brightened my days after the death of Amelia, my wife. I never imagined my greatest enemy would be sitting at my own table, toasting to the future while planning my ruin. The house was full of familiar smells. The roast my daughter-in-law Linda was preparing, the perfume of fresh roses on the dining room table, and that faint smell of rust I always detected on my hands, no matter how hard I scrubbed them. While Sarah ran from one side to the other, adjusting the last details of her wedding, I noticed a restlessness in Michael that wasn't just nerves from the father of the bride. It took me years to recognize it, but that shifty look was the same one he had as a boy when he broke something and feared my reaction. During breakfast, he and Linda exchanged whispers. They must have thought I wouldn't notice, but a lifetime of reading faces on the workshop floor had trained me to catch the small lies and treacherous gestures. At one point, he hugged me enthusiastically, too enthusiastically for him, and wished me strength for the big day. I noticed how his hand trembled when he patted my shoulder. It wasn't fatherly emotion. It was calculated anxiety. Despite everything, I took a deep breath and decided to enjoy the day. It was hard to contain the suspicion that something was wrong. Why had Michael insisted so much on helping organize the wedding when he'd always hated these social events? Why was he so aware of my movements, even asking insistently if I planned to take the company papers with me that weekend? I tried to reason logically. Maybe I was exaggerating. Maybe Thestris was playing tricks on me. However, every little gesture set me back in time, remembering scenes where blind trust had cost me dearly in business. I shook my head, trying to push away the dark thoughts as I greeted the guests. Among them, my old friend Robert Bell, Sr., the groom's father, a man of few words but with an honest gaze. Everything changed after the service. The ceremony was flawless. Sarah looked radiant walking down the aisle, and the emotion on Robert's face. The son, as the father was next to me, was genuine. For a moment, I was tempted to let my guard down, but Michael's cold hug after the family photo brought me back to reality. It was then that in a low, determined voice, he asked me to join him in the study. "It's an important moment, Dad," he whispered, walking ahead of me with a firm step. He closed the door, and while the noise continued outside, he pulled a thick envelope from his jacket. He placed it on the solid oak desk, the same desk where decades ago we had celebrated buying our first industrial lathe. "I want you to sign some documents today," he said without looking me in the eye. "You don't have to worry. It's just about ensuring the company passes to me while you enjoy life as you deserve." His words were rehearsed. The paper crinkled in his fingers in contrast to my cold, calm pulse. I didn't answer right away. My mind replayed years of Amelia's warnings. The deepest betrayal comes from the one you love the most, David. "And why today, Michael?" I finally asked, not hiding the weariness in my voice. "Why at your daughter's wedding in front of the whole family?" The silence became tense. Michael swallowed hard, but tried to recover. "Dad, you're getting older. The company is too much for you. I know what's best for everyone. Don't be stubborn, please." He held out a pen. I didn't tremble, but I felt my trust in him crumble like rust on old steel. "Well, talk about this another day," I answered without raising my voice. The annoyance on his face was obvious. "You have no idea what we're risking if you keep postponing this," he insisted almost through gritted teeth. "You can't leave me hanging like this in front of everyone." I left the study with my head held high. Though inside I felt like my stomach was about to empty, I knew that scene was just the beginning. From then on, every moment of the party had an undercurrent of threat. The toasts were loaded with hidden meanings, and the noise now sounded like an alarm siren, high-pitched and distant, but unstoppable. As I greeted guests, I saw Michael out of the corner of my eye checking his phone, sending frantic messages. Maybe to Linda, maybe to a lawyer, maybe to no one, just to hide the tension. More than once I saw him whispering to Sarah, who, unaware of it all, laughed nervously and tried to maintain the image of harmony she so wanted for her wedding day. The afternoon wore on, and fear gave way to resolve. If Michael wanted to humiliate me in public, I would have to see just how far he was willing to go. I was prepared for anything, even to discover that the strongest iron is the one that survives the hottest fire, not the careless hammer of an ungrateful son. If the guests had known how close we were to the biggest family storm in our history, maybe no one would have toasted with such joy that afternoon. The real clash wasn't at the party, or in the flowers, or in the wedding vows, but in the silent betrayal that had risen that morning over the foundations of my life and was about to shake them to their core. The cocktail hour passed in an atmosphere I tried to perceive as normal, even though my instinct warned me otherwise. The guests moved around the estate's garden as if nothing had happened in the study minutes before. Sarah looked splendid in her ivory dress, chatting with her college friends, while Robert, her new husband, attended to his coworkers. However, my eyes couldn't leave Michael. I watched him from the main terrace. He had changed his tie, a strange detail considering the ceremony had ended just an hour ago, and he was obsessively checking a leather briefcase he kept under his left arm. It wasn't the same briefcase he used for his usual meeting. Sat the company. This one was new, elegant, as if it had been bought specifically for this occasion. Every time a guest approached to greet me, he appeared immediately, interrupting the conversation with excuses about organizing the event. My brother-in-law, Stephen, my late wife Amelia's brother, approached with a glass of red wine in his hand. His eyes reflected the same worry I felt, though neither of us said it out loud. "David," he said quietly, "is everything all right?" Michael seems agitated. It's not the typical joy of a father at his daughter's wedding. I nodded without committing to an answer. Weddings make everyone nervous, Stephen. I guess he's thinking about the cost of all this. But I knew I was lying. Michael's nervousness had nothing to do with expenses or fatherly emotions. It was something deeper, more calculated. I confirmed it when during lunch he managed to sit exactly across from me at the main table. Between the first and second course, he discreetly slid a folded napkin to my side of the table. I opened it carefully. "We need to talk before the toast. It's urgent. Don't fail me, Dad." The message was written in a hurry, but the handwriting was firm. He had definitely planned every move of this day. I looked up and our eyes met, in his. I saw a mix of pleading and veiled threat that made my skin crawl. I crumpled the napkin and put it in my jacket pocket, determined to keep my composure, at least until I fully understood his intentions. Linda, sitting to his right, seemed unaware of the tension. She chatted lively with Sarah's aunts about the honeymoon plans for Greece, but I noticed her hands trembled slightly when she lifted her glass. Was she an accomplice in Michael's plans, or just another victim of his schemes? During dessert, a 3-tiered cake that had cost more than my worker's monthly salary. Michael stood up and asked for silence by tapping his knife against his glass. The murmurs gradually faded until only the sound of the wind in the garden's oak trees remained. "Dear family and friends," he began with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This is a special moment for our family. Seeing Sarah so happy, so radiant, fills me with pride as a father, but it also makes me reflect on the legacy we leave for the new generations." His words sounded rehearsed, like an actor who had memorized his lines. I looked at Sarah, who was smiling with genuine emotion, completely unaware of the subtext in her father's words. "My father David," he continued, gesturing to me dramatically, "has worked tirelessly for over 4 decades to build Harrison Metals. He has been an example of dedication and sacrifice. But now, in this golden stage of his life, I believe he deserves to rest and enjoy the fruits of so much effort." A murmur of approval went through the tables. Several guests nodded. Some even applauded discreetly. Michael had managed to win the crowd's sympathy before I could even process where his speech was going, and so his voice rose slightly. "I want to publicly announce that today, on our daughter's happiest day, my father and I will formalize the transition of the family business. It is time for the new generation to take the reins, allowing their elders to enjoy a well-deserved retirement." The applause that followed was more enthusiastic. The guests looked at me kindly, as if Michael had proposed the most natural and loving solution in the world. I felt the trap closing around me. I had become the unwilling star of a play where all the other actors knew their part except me. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of all those eyes. The silence became expectant, almost religious. Sarah smiled at me from her seat, her eyes shining with emotion, without a doubt, waiting for words of approval for her father's beautiful gesture. I appreciate Michael's words, I began, measuring every syllable, but I must clarify that we have not formally discussed any business transition. The silence that followed my words was deafening. I watched as the guest's smiles slowly faded, replaced by expressions of confusion and slight discomfort. Michael tried to keep his composure, but the flush rising up his neck betrayed him. He didn't expect me to publicly contradict his version of events. Dad. He cut in quickly with a forced laugh. It must be the emotion of the moment. You'll remember better after the party. The important thing now is to celebrate Sarah and Robert. But the damage was done. Murmurs began to spread between the tables. I heard fragments of conversations. They don't agree. What an awkward situation, those poor kids. My cousin Hope, always direct, shot me a questioning look from the distant relatives' table. Sarah quickly came over, taking my arm affectionately. Grandpa, don't worry about business today. This is my special day, remember? Her voice had its usual sweetness, but I detected a note of pleading that disarmed me for a moment. Of course, Princess, I replied, caressing her cheek. I'm sorry for interrupting your celebration, but some things shouldn't be decided under pressure. The look Michael gave me in that instant froze my blood. It was pure contained frustration, the look of someone watching a carefully crafted plan fall apart. He excused himself from the main table and headed toward a group of my old business partners, Theodore Ted Vargas, Mark Santos, and Jack Herrera. I had known them since the first years of Harrison Metals, back when we shared small contracts and drank beer after grueling days. From where I stood, I could see Michael talking to them with expansive gestures, pointing at me occasionally. I couldn't hear the exact words, but his body language was eloquent. He was building a narrative where I was the stubborn patriarch, clinging unnecessarily to power, refusing to recognize the needs of the new generation. Ted was the first to approach. His 65 years gave him a natural authority among the local businessmen, and his gray beard inspired respect. He clapped me on the shoulder familiarly. David, my friend, Michael told us about the company transition. It's natural to feel attached to what you built, but you also have to know when to let go of the res. Look at me. When I handed the construction company over to my sons, my life changed completely. Now I enjoy my grandkids without the daily stress of the business. His words sounded reasonable, but they came loaded with Michael's prior manipulation. Mark Santos jumped in immediately. Besides, brother, you're at an age where you should prioritize your health. The shocks of the business aren't good for the heart. At 67, I felt cornered. Michael had turned my own friends into unwitting spokesmen for his agenda. The strategy was brilliant, using the genuine concern of respectable people to pressure me into a decision he desperately needed. I appreciate your concern, I replied calmly, but my health is perfect, and the company is doing better than ever. I see no reason to rush important changes. Jack Herrera, the youngest of the group, exchanged a meaningful look with Michael before speaking. Sure, David, but think about it from Sarah's perspective. She needs financial security now that she's starting her marriage. If something happened to you without the succession being formalized, the legal paperwork could complicate everything for months. The mention of Sarah was the lowest blow. Michael had instructed Jack to use my most obvious weakness, my unconditional love for my granddaughter. The move was dirty but effective. I saw several guests nod, convinced that my resistance to the transition could hurt the newlyweds' future. Linda appeared at my side with a glass of whiskey. Mr. Harrison, she said in a soft voice, I understand these topics are complicated, but Michael only wants what's best for you and the family. He's been very worried lately about the workload you're carrying. He says you stay at the office very late, reviewing contracts and supervising every detail. It was true. For the past few months, I had increased my presence at the company, but not because of inability or old age, but because I had detected minor irregularities in some financial reports, small discrepancies that wouldn't alarm anyone on their own, but when added up, they painted a troubling pattern. Linda, I answered carefully, I work more hours because there are important decisions that require experience. The company isn't just numbers. It's 40 years of relationships, delicate contracts, and market knowledge that you can't transfer overnight. She nodded sympathetically. but I noticed her eyes avoided direct contact with mine. How much did she really know about the true motives behind Michael's urgency? The festive atmosphere had imperceptibly transformed into a collective family counseling session. The guests further away continued their normal conversations, unaware of the drama unfolding in the inner circle. But those who knew the business situation had formed an informal semicircle around us. Robert Sr. approached discreetly. His reserved personality contrasted with the other businessmen, and his opinion carried considerable moral weight in the group. "David," he said in a low voice, "I don't know the details of your specific situation, but I do know that decisions made under pressure rarely turn out well. If you need time to think about it, no one should force you to decide today." His words were like a life raft in the middle of the storm. Finally, someone recognized my right to maintain control over my own business decisions. Michael reacted immediately. "Of course, there's no pressure, Robert. We're just talking as a family. But it's important to consider that some bureaucratic processes can take weeks, and it would be ideal to have everything resolved before Sarah and your son get back from their honeymoon." Another elegant lie. There were no urgent bureaucratic processes that justified this rush. My personal accountant, Robert Diaz, kept all the corporate documents perfectly up to date. If I decided to transfer the company tomorrow, the paperwork wouldn't take more than 3 business days. The tension was palpable. Sarah and Robert Jowier watched from their table, clearly uncomfortable about becoming the indirect center of a family dispute they didn't fully understand. Other guests began to excuse themselves discreetly, claiming prior commitments or the need to return home early. My decision was made. I wouldn't sign anything that day, no matter how much social pressure Michael applied. But I also understood that the battle was just beginning. If he had invested so much effort in organizing this public ambush, he wouldn't give up easily after my first refusal. What I didn't imagine was how far he would be willing to go to get what he wanted. And I certainly never suspected that the real revelation in this story wouldn't come from him, but from the person I trusted most in the entire world. The afternoon wore on, and the guests began to spread out through the estate's gardens. Some took refuge under the pergolas, covered in bougainvillea to escape the heat, while others gathered near the central fountain, where the sound of water provided a relaxing backdrop to their conversations. I took advantage of this natural dispersal to get away from the main group and find a moment of peace. I headed toward the farthest part of the garden where Amelia used to grow her favorite rose bushes. Even though years had passed since her death, Linda maintained that corner with the same care, and the roses bloomed every season like a silent tribute to her memory. It was my refuge when I needed to think clearly. I hadn't been there more than 5 minutes when I heard footsteps on the gravel. Michael appeared from between the trees, walking with determination toward where I was standing. He had completely lost the cheerful composure he had shown during lunch. His face reflected a mix of frustration and urgency that I hadn't seen since his teenage years when his mischief turned into serious problems. "We have to talk, Dad." Now, his tone was completely different from the one he had used in front of the guests. There was no trace of respect or politeness. It was the voice of someone who had run out of patience and was ready to show his true cards. "I'm listening, Michael." He came closer until he was barely 3 feet away. I could see the small drops of sweat on his forehead and the almost imperceptible tremor in his hands. It wasn't just nerves. It was desperation. "You can't do this to me in front of the whole family. Do you have any idea how humiliating your answer was during the toast? Ted, Mark, and Jack now think I'm an incompetent fool who can't even convince his own father. Maybe because you haven't given me a single valid reason to make such an important decision in such a rush." His breathing quickened. "A valid reason? You don't think it's enough that I've been working at the company for 10 years, learning every aspect of the business, earning the respect of the employees and clients?" "All of that is true," I admitted, "but it doesn't explain why you need me to sign transfer documents today at your daughter's wedding without even discussing it beforehand." He ran his hands through his hair, visibly coming undone. "Why won't you give me a chance, Dad? Every time I try to bring up the subject, you postpone it. You always have an excuse. There's an important contract pending. You need to review the numbers. It's not the right time." There was some truth to his words. For the past few months, I had consciously avoided conversations about the succession, but not out of some elderly whim, but because my quiet investigation into the financial irregularities had put me on high alert. "Michael," I said, keeping my tone calm, "the company I built over 4 decades isn't something I can just transfer in an afternoon based on pressure from other businessmen. If you're really ready to run it, you should understand that important decisions require time and analysis." His eyes hardened. Time analysis. Dad, you're 67 years old. What are you waiting for? To turn 80? To let it go? Or do you plan to die in that office, clinging to every nut and bolt and every contract? The veiled insult hurt more than a slap. My whole life I had worked thinking about his future, sacrificing vacations, hobbies, and even my own health to ensure he would inherit a solid and prosperous company. To hear him interpret my dedication as elderly greed was devastating. Watch your mouth, son. Respect isn't lost with age. It's earned with actions. Respect? He laughed bitterly. What respect can I have for someone who treats me like just another employee after a decade of proving my ability? The other businessmen in our industry already think Harrison Metals is an obsolete company run by an old man who won't accept the generational change. His words were calculated to wound my professional pride. He knew my business reputation was one of my most prized possessions, built on fulfilling contracts, maintaining quality, and honoring every commitment I made. If they really think that, then they don't know the numbers. The company has had its best years during this last decade. The contracts with the biggest construction firms in the country speak for themselves. Exactly, he exclaimed, as if I had fallen into a trap. That's why it's the perfect time for the transition when the company is at its peak, when I can continue that upward trajectory without interruptions. For the first time in the conversation, his argument sounded coherent. But my instinct, sharpened by decades of complex negotiations, warned me that something fundamental didn't fit his reasoning. Michael, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want an honest answer. Why is it so urgent that I sign today? What has changed in the last few weeks that makes this transition an emergency? The silence that followed was revealing. I watched his eyes dart to the rose bushes, to the ground, to any point that wasn't my face. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its previous strength. Opportunities don't wait, Dad. There are investors interested in participating in expansion projects, but they need guarantees that the company has stable, long-term leadership. Another vague, rehearsed answer. In 40 years of business, I had learned to detect when someone was deliberately avoiding a direct question. What investors for what project specifically? If there are growth opportunities, we should analyze them together regardless of who is leading the company. His discomfort became more and more obvious. They're contacts I've developed on my own. Opportunities that came from my own professional networks. Fine. Tomorrow morning, we'll meet at the office and you can present all the documentation related to these projects. If they truly represent the future of the company, I'll have no problem considering them. No, he yelled, completely losing his composure. You can't keep controlling every decision. You're not the only one who understands this business anymore. I have the right to direct my own future without being under your constant supervision. His emotional explosion confirmed my suspicions. This wasn't about business opportunities or corporate vision. There was something deeper, more personal, and more desperate behind his urgency. Michael, I said in a firm voice, I'm going to be very clear with you. I am not signing any documents today. If you want to discuss the succession, we can do it next week. Calmly with the numbers on the table and with full transparency, but not under pressure and not without me fully understanding the real reasons behind your rush. His face transformed. The frustration gave way to something much darker, a combination of anger and panic I had never seen in him. You have no idea what you're doing to me, he muttered through gritted teeth. You don't have the slightest idea of the consequences of your stubbornness. What consequences? What are you talking about? But he was already walking away, taking long strides toward the main house. Before disappearing between the trees, he turned back one last time. If you don't change your mind before this party is over, there will be consequences that neither of us can control. And when that happens, don't blame me for what comes next. I was left alone among Amelia's roses, my heart pounding, and a growing certainty that the real confrontation was just beginning. The veiled threats from my own son confirmed I was facing something much more dangerous than a simple generational dispute over the company. What I couldn't imagine was that the full truth would be even more devastating than my worst fears could conceive. I walked back slowly toward the celebration, but the atmosphere had subtly changed. The conversation group seemed more tense, as if news of our confrontation had filtered through the guests. Sarah was by the dessert table, smiling mechanically as she cut extra slices of cake for stragglers. But I could see the rigidity in her movements. Linda intercepted me near the main entrance. Her expression had lost its previous friendliness, replaced by a worry that seemed genuine but also calculated. Mr. Harrison? Is everything all right? Michael came back very upset. He He says you're flatly refusing to consider any transition, even a gradual one. Linda, I answered carefully, your husband seems to have an urgency that I can't understand. I've worked my whole life building this company. I'm not going to hand it over based on emotional pressure alone. She looked down for a moment before continuing. It's just there are things you don't know. Michael has been under a lot of stress lately. There are financial situations, personal ones, that have him very worried. Those words put me on high alert. What kind of financial situations? I shouldn't be the one to tell you, she murmured, looking nervously toward where Michael was, talking intensely with Jack Herrera. But I think you have a right to know. Michael has been well. He's had some problems with personal debts. My stomach tightened. For 40 years, I had kept the company finances completely separate from family expenses. I never allowed personal problems to affect the company's operation. What kind of debts? Investments that went bad, she answered evasively. He gambled money on businesses that didn't work out. Now, the lenders are pressuring him to pay, and he was planning to use part of the company's capital to cover those debts. The revelation left me breathless. Myson had been mixing his personal financial failures with the family business. It wasn't just irresponsibility, it was a fundamental betrayal of the principles on which we had built Harrison Metals. How much money does he owe? Linda hesitated before answering. I'm not sure of the exact amount, but it's considerable. Enough to seriously jeopardize our family's assets if he doesn't find a solution soon. In that moment, I understood the true scope of the trap. Michael didn't want to run the company out of passion or business vision. He needed it as collateral to save his own financial skin. The urgency, the public pressure, the veiled threats. It all made sense now. And what do you think about all this, Linda? Her answer was barely a whisper. I'm scared, Mr. Harrison. The men who lent him the money, they aren't normal people. They've made threatening calls to the house. That's why Michael is so desperate. It's not just about money. It's about our family's safety. The situation had become much more serious than I imagined. I wasn't just facing my son's ambition, but the consequences of irresponsible decisions that had endangered the entire family. I looked for Michael and found him heading toward me again, this time accompanied by Ted and Mark. His expression had hardened as if he had made a final decision during our time apart. Dad, he said loudly enough for several nearby guests to hear. We've been talking with our business friends about your situation. Everyone agrees that it's normal to feel attached to the company, but also that there comes a time when holding on too tight can be counterproductive. Ted nodded gravely. David, my friend, we've seen similar cases in this industry. Successful businessmen who didn't know when to give up control and ended up damaging what they had built. Mark jumped in immediately. Besides, think about Sarah and Robert. They need financial stability now that they're starting their married life. If something happened to you without the succession being formalized, the legal process could freeze the assets 4 months. It was the same strategy he had used during lunch, but now amplified and with more witnesses. Michael had turned my resistance into the party's main event, forcing me to justify my business decisions in front of people who had no right to an opinion on my private affairs. Gentlemen, I replied, maintaining my composure. I appreciate your concern, but the decisions about my company will be made based on technical and legal criteria, not social pressure. Michael exchanged a significant look with Linda before taking his next step. Dad, there's something else you should know. For the past few months, I've been getting inquiries from other business owners in the industry interested in making offers on parts of the company. Very attractive offers that could result in a substantial profit for the whole family. The lie was so blatant it outraged me. What offers? I haven't authorized any sale negotiations, partial or total. You didn't need to authorize them, he replied with a coldness that made my skin crawl. As vice president of the company, I have the authority to explore business opportunities. And what I've discovered is that by keeping the operation as it is, we are losing out on million-dollar opportunities. There it was, the naked truth. Michael had been using his position in the company to negotiate behind my back, probably compromising assets or contracts without my knowledge. Michael, I said, feeling the anger start to boil inside me, if you've been negotiating in the company's name without my authorization, that is a serious offense that could have severe legal consequences. His reaction was immediate and explosive. Legal consequences? Are you threatening me? Your own son? After everything I've sacrificed working in your company for 10 years? The volume of his voice drew the attention of every guest present. Conversation stopped abruptly, and a circle of spectators began to form around us. I am not threatening you, I answered firmly. I am explaining that there are legal and ethical procedures. You cannot violate regardless of your relationship to me. To hell with your procedures, he screamed, completely losing his composure. I am sick of your business ethics lessons. What I need right now is for you to sign those damn papers and stop acting like you're the only one capable of running a business. The circle of guests had widened. Sarah ran over, clearly alarmed by her father's shouts. Robert Jr. followed her closely, his expression one of deep discomfort. Dad, Grandpa, please. Sarah intervened, tears in her eyes. We are at my wedding. You can't fight like this in front of everyone. But Michael had already crossed every line of sanity. Your grandfather is a selfish man who prefers to keep his power rather than help his own family. He doesn't care that we're in danger. He doesn't care about your future. He doesn't care about anything but his damn company. Enough, I finally shouted. I will not tolerate you speaking to me like that in front of my granddaughter. And then the unthinkable happened. Michael, blinded by desperation and rage, closed his right fist and hit me directly on the left cheek. The impact staggered me, and he felt the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. The silence that followed was absolute. 200 people had just watched a 44-year-old man punch his 67-year-old father at his own daughter's wedding. Sarah screamed in horror. Several men immediately rushed over to support me before I could fall. The physical pain was intense, but the emotional pain was devastating. My own son, the person I'd placed all my hopes and my legacy in, had just physically assaulted me in front of our entire community. As I wiped the blood with the handkerchief Ted offered me, I looked directly into Michael's eyes. I no longer saw the boy I had raised, the young man I had educated, the man I had trusted. I saw a desperate stranger, capable of anything to save his own skin. In that moment, I knew our relationship was over forever. The shock of the blow echoed through the garden like a shockwave. The guests remained petrified, processing the unimaginable. They had witnessed domestic violence at what should have been a family celebration. The silence grew heavier and heavier, broken only by the muffled sobs of some of the women and the disbelieving murmurs of the men. Sarah lunged toward me, her face undone, her beautiful wedding dress dragging on the gravel as she ran. Her tears fell freely, smudging the makeup that had taken hours to perfect that morning. "Grandpa! Oh my God, Grandpa!" she cried, taking my face in her trembling hands. "Are you okay? Does it hurt?" The genuine concern in her eyes contrasted brutally with the cold indifference Michael showed toward his actions. He remained motionless, fists still clenched, breathing hard like a cornered animal. "I'm fine, Princess," he murmured, though the sharp pain in my cheek betrayed my words. "It's just a punch." But Sarah was not willing to minimize what happened. She stood up slowly, turning to her father with an expression I had never seen on her before. It was a devastating mix of disappointment, shame, and contained fury. "How could you?" she said, her voice trembling but firm. "How could you hit Grandpa at my wedding? In front of my whole family, all my friends." Michael tried to justify himself, babbling incoherently. "Sarah, you don't understand." He was. "The situation got out of control. Nothing justifies this." She cut him off, raising her voice to her father for the first time in her life. "Nothing. He is your father. He is an old man. He is my grandfather." Robert Jr. approached discreetly and put a protective hand on his new wife's shoulder. His expression showed deep disgust, not just at the violence, but at being involved in a family scandal that would forever taint the memory of his wedding. The guests began to react. Ted and Mark exchanged looks of absolute disbelief. They had never seen anything like this in decades of knowing our family. Jack Herrera moved away discreetly, clearly uncomfortable, having been an unwilling participant in the pressure that triggered the violence. Linda remained paralyzed near the main entrance, her hands covering her mouth. Her face had lost all color, and her eyes reflected a mix of terror and humiliation, confirming that this explosion surpassed even her worst expectations of her husband's behavior. But then something happened that no one, not even me, had anticipated. Sarah planted herself firmly in front of Michael, chin held high with a determination that vividly reminded me of her late grandmother, Amelia. "Dad," she said, her voice calm but loaded with a new authority. "There are things you haven't told, Grandpa. Things I've known for weeks." Michael turned pale instantly. "Sarah, this isn't the time or the place." "Exactly." She cut him off again. This wasn't the time or the place to pressure Grandpa or to lie to him, and certainly not to hit him. "But since you decided to turn my wedding into the stage for your desperation, then everyone is going to hear the whole truth." A murmur of expectation rippled through the spectators. The tension had changed. It was no longer just a dispute between father and son, but family secrets about to be exposed. "Sarah, please," Michael begged, his voice breaking. "Don't do this here." But she'd already made her decision. She walked toward me with a protective expression, as if she were their responsible adult, and I was the one needing care. "Grandpa," she said softly, "for the last 3 weeks, Dad has been pressuring me to convince you to sign those documents. He promised Meth that if I helped him, he would pay for my entire honeymoon to Greece, even the extra expenses Robert and I had planned." The revelation hit me hard. Michael had tried to buy his own daughter to manipulate me, turning Sarah into a pawn in his desperate strategy. "But that's not all," she continued, pulling her cell phone from the small purse hanging on her wrist. "When I refused to pressure you anymore, Dad started to threaten me. He said if I didn't help him, he would cancel my wedding, that he wouldn't pay for the party, that he would make sure to ruin the most important day of my life." Michael tried to approach her, but Sarah instinctively recoiled. "That's not true. I never threatened you." "No," she replied quickly, tapping the screen of her phone. "Then explain these recordings I have right here." The world stopped. The 200 guests, Linda, Robert, even Michael. We all stood motionless as Sarah prepared top-lay evidence none of us knew existed. "For the last 2 weeks," she explained, her voice firm. "Every time Dad came to pressure me about Grandpa, I discreetly activated the recorder on my phone. At first, I thought I just needed to protect myself from his emotional blackmail, but then I realized I was documenting something much more serious." She pressed play. Michael's voice emerged clear and sharp from the speaker. "Sarah, listen to me. If your grandfather doesn't sign those papers before your wedding, we lose everything. The house, the company, even the chance for you and Robert to have a stable future. Is that what you want?" The recording continued, but Sarah's voice responded firmly. "Dad, I don't understand why it's so urgent. Grandpa has always taken care of us." "Because I've debts you can't even imagine," Michael yelled in the recording. "I owe money to very dangerous people, and if I don't get capital fast, I won't just lose everything I have. We will be putting the entire family's safety at risk." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael had been publicly exposed, not just as a family manipulator, but as someone who had endangered all of us with his irresponsible financial decisions. Sarah stopped the playback and looked directly at her father. "There are more recordings, Dad, many more, including own where you admit exactly how much money you owe and who you owe it to." Linda staggered forward, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Is it true, Michael? Did you really put us in danger without telling us?" But Michael couldn't hold up the lies anymore. His facade as a respectable businessman had completely crumbled in front of the entire community. He sank heavily into a nearby chair, covering his face with his hands. "It all got out of control," he muttered through sobs. "I never wanted it to go this far." Sarah turned to me with a look of deep sadness. "Grandpa, I am so sorry I hid this from you for weeks. I was afraid that if I told you the truth, you would cancel my wedding to protect me. I wanted to handle the situation myself, but Dad just got more desperate every day." I took her hands, feeling a mix of pride and pain for the burden she had carried in silence. My granddaughter had shown more maturity and character in those moments than her father had in his entire adult life. But there was still a fundamental question to answer. What exactly was the extent of Michael's problems? And how badly had they compromised all of our futures? The answer would come in the next few minutes, and it would be even more devastating than any of us could imagine. Sarah took a deep breath, as if preparing to reveal something that had been tormenting her for weeks. The circle of guests had closed completely around us, creating an impromptu amphitheater where my granddaughter was about to expose the full truth. "There is one specific recording you need to hear," she announced, her voice shaking but resolute. "It's from 5 days ago. When Dad came to my apartment completely desperate, Michael shot his head up, his eyes red from crying. Sarah, no. Please don't make this public. It's too late for pleading. Dad, you hit Grandpa in front of 200 people. There is nothing private left to protect." She tapped her phone again, searching through several audio files. The tension was palpable. Even the guests furthest away had stopped their conversations to move closer and hear what was about to be revealed. "This recording is almost 10 minutes long," Sarah explained, "but I'm going to play the most important part. It's where Dad admits exactly what kind of trouble he got into." She hit play. The audio quality was surprisingly clear, probably because Michael had been speaking very close to her hidden phone. Sarah's voice came first. "Dad, I don't understand why you can't just ask Grandpa for a loan if you really need money." Then Michael's answer loaded with desperation. "A loan? Sarah, this can't be fixed with a loan. I owe $280,000 to people who don't accept payment plans or negotiations. They are professional loan sharks, people who lend money for online sports betting. A murmur of shock went through the crowd. Online gambling was taboo in our conservative business community, associated with losing control and family destruction. The recording continued. It started small, Michael admitted. Bets of $1,000 or $2,000 on games that seemed like a sure thing. But when I started to lose, I thought I could win it back by betting larger amounts. In 6 months, I lost all my personal savings. The joint account I had with your mother, I even took cash advances on the credit cards. Sarah's voice on the recording sounded horrified. Does Mom know all this? Your mother knows nothing. She thinks we have cash flow problems at the company, but she doesn't know the real extent. If she finds out I gambled away the college fund for your younger siblings, she'll leave me immediately. Linda let out a choked gasp hearing this. She had found out at that very moment, along with everyone else, that Michael had systematically destroyed his entire family's financial security. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. Michael's voice on the recording grew more frantic. The lenders aren't taking excuses anymore. They gave me until the 15th of this month to pay in full. Or they'll start taking measures to get their money in other ways. What kind of measures? Sarah asked on the recording. They threatened to go directly to your grandfather. They'll tell him everything. The gambling, the debts. They'll even show him photos of our house and your apartment. They said if I can't pay, they will find ways to make the family pay for me. The silence that followed on the recording was chilling. Then Sarah's broken voice. Dad, are you telling me you put Grandpa and the whole family in danger because of your gambling? I had no choice, Michael yelled. Once you start owing these people money, you can't just decide to stop. They decide when it ends, not you. Sarah stopped the playback. The tears were streaming down her face, but her voice remained firm. There's more, Grandpa. Much more. Including the part where Dad explains exactly what he planned to do with the company once he had control. Michael stood up desperately. Stop! That's enough! They don't need to hear anymore. Yes, they do, Sarah replied firmly, especially Grandpa, because what comes next is the worst part of all. She resumed playback. This time, Michael's voice sounded calmer, but also more calculating. The plan is simple, Sarah. Once your grandfather transfers the company to me, I'll immediately start selling assets. The main machinery has a market value of at least $150,000. The contracts with the construction firms can be transferred to competitors for another $100,000. Even just selling half the assets, I can pay off the loan sharks and still have money left to keep the basic operation running. The strategy was diabolical in its simplicity. Michael planned to dismantle 40 years of work to save his skin, destroying the legacy I had built in the process. But the worst was yet to be revealed. The recording continued, and if your grandfather objects or tries to interfere once the documents are signed, well, at his age, it's easy to argue that he's losing his mental faculties. A couple of strategic medical evaluations, and we could establish a guardianship that gives me permanent total control. The coldness with which Michael had planned my systematic destruction left me breathless. He hadn't just planned to steal the company. He had planned to declare me mentally incompetent if I resisted his plunder. Sarah finally stopped the recording for good. There are 4 more hours of similar conversations, she announced, all documenting how Dad planned to use Grandpa to solve his gambling problems, no matter the cost to the rest of us. The guests' reaction was immediate and brutal. Ted, Mark, and Jack visibly backed away from Michael as if his presence were contagious. Several smaller businessmen whispered among themselves about needing to review any pending deals with our family. Linda staggered toward where Michael remained, slumped in the chair. Her face reflected a devastating mix of betrayal, humiliation, and fury. How could you? She asked, her voice barely audible. How could you gamble away our children's future? How could you plan to destroy your own father? Michael tried to answer, but only incoherent mumbles came out. His collapse was complete. Physical, emotional, social, and financial. Robert Sr. approached me discreetly and spoke in my ear. David, I think it would be wise for some of us to escort the ladies to a more private place. This situation has become far too public. He was right. The exposure had served to reveal the truth, but dragging it out would only amplify the scandal and the suffering, especially for Sarah Hahn her wedding day. However, there were still crucial decisions to make. Michael had confessed his betrayal, but the threats from the loan sharks were still real. The problems he created wouldn't disappear just because they were exposed. I looked at my granddaughter, who had shown more courage that afternoon than many adults show in a lifetime. She had risked her own wedding to protect me from a conspiracy that could have destroyed everything. It was time to make the hardest decisions of my life, knowing the consequences would be permanent. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of my years, but also a mental clarity I hadn't felt in months. The pain in my cheek no longer mattered. What I had just heard had crystallized a decision that deep down I knew I had to make from the moment Michael hit me. The circle of guests remained silent, awaiting my reaction. 200 people had witnessed not just family violence, but the recorded confession of a conspiracy that would have destroyed 4 decades of honest work. My response would define not only my family's future, but my own legacy. "Sarah," I said softly, holding out my hand to her. "Come here, princess." She approached immediately, taking my hand with fingers that still trembled from the emotional strain. Her wedding dress, stained with tears and wrinkled from the agitation, was a brutal contrast to the elegance she had worn that morning. "I want all of you to be witnesses to what I am about to say," I announced, projecting my voice so every guest could hear clearly. For 42 years, I built Harrison Metals with one purpose: to ensure the well-being and prosperity of my family. I worked 16-hour days. I sacrificed vacations, health, and comfort because I believed I was building a legacy for future generations. I paused, looking directly at Michael, who remained sunk in the chair, his face covered by his hands. But what I have discovered today shows me that my greatest mistake was confusing fatherly love with tolerance for irresponsibility. My son has not only betrayed my trust, he has endangered the safety of this entire family to feed a destructive addiction. Ted and Mark exchanged uncomfortable looks. They had never seen such a harsh public declaration between family, but they couldn't deny the circumstances. Therefore, I continued, feeling the weight of every word. I publicly declare that Michael Harrison is completely disinherited. He will not receive $1 of my estate. He will have no part in Harrison Metals. And as of this moment, he is permanently expelled from this family. A gasp of shock went through the crowd. Though many had anticipated severe consequences, the absolute finality of my decision surpassed most expectations. Michael shot his head up, his eyes red and swollen. "Dad, no, you can't do this. I'm your only son." "You were my son," I answered coldly. "But a son does not hit his father. A son does not conspire to steal his life's work. A son does not threaten his family's safety to cover gambling debts." I turned to Sarah, who watched me with a mix of sadness and admiration. I knew my next decision would change her life forever. "Sarah, your behavior during these weeks has shown a maturity, valor, and loyalty that your father never possessed. For that reason, I've decided to establish a trust fund that will protect all my assets until you turn 30. On that date, full ownership of Harrison Metals, along with all associated properties and bank accounts, will be transferred to you." Tears welled up in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude mixed with overwhelming responsibility. "Grandpa, I don't know if I'm ready for that much responsibility." "You have 7 years to prepare," I answered with a smile. "And during that time, the company will be managed by a board of professionals I will appoint. You will participate gradually, learning every aspect of the business without the pressure of making critical decisions immediately." Linda approached hesitantly, her face devastated. "David," she whispered, "what happens to us? To the children and me?" Her question broke my heart. Linda and my 2 younger grandchildren were innocent victims of Michael's destructive choices. They didn't deserve to suffer, but I couldn't let my compassion create vulnerabilities he could exploit. "Linda," I answered, carefully, "you and the children will always have my moral and emotional support. But any financial help I provide will be direct, personal, and completely independent of any involvement Michael may have in your lives." It was a clear message. If she stayed with him, my support would be limited. If she left to protect her children, she would find an unconditional ally. Robert Sr. approached discreetly. "David, I think it would be wise to formalize these decisions legally as soon as possible. If these loan shark threats are real, protecting the assets and trusts is crucial." He was right. The lenders wouldn't just disappear. "Robert," I replied, "tomorrow morning I will contact my lawyers to shield everything. Michael has lost any legal right to the family assets. But I need to make sure his irresponsibility can't affect Sarah's future." Michael made one last desperate attempt. He staggered to his feet and approached me, arms outstretched as if to kneel. "Dad, forgive me. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I can change. I can get help for the gambling addiction. I can work to pay the debts. Don't abandon me completely." His plea sounded genuine, and for a moment my father's heart wavered. But then I remembered the recordings, planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. Michael, I said firmly, forgiveness requires genuine repentance, not desperation over the consequences. If you want to change your life, you'll have to do it without my money, my company, and without the safety net of this family rescuing you from your future mistakes. I turned to the remaining guests. Ladies and gentlemen, I deeply regret that you had to witness this family scandal. Sarah and Robert deserved a memorable celebration, not this painful exhibition. Sarah hugged me tightly. Grandpa, thank you for protecting me. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't even know if I was doing the right thing. Princess, I whispered in her ear, your courage to expose the truth saved me from a betrayal that would have destroyed everything. I will never forget what you did today. The guests began to disperse, some saying quiet goodbyes, others just walking away. My decision was made. Michael had lost his inheritance and the privilege of calling himself my son. Some betrayals simply cannot be forgiven. What I didn't know was that the biggest challenges were still to come, and my determination would be tested in ways I couldn't even imagine. The silence after my declaration spread through the garden. The guests were processing the complete collapse of a family. Michael remained standing, swaying. But then, something completely unexpected happened. He literally threw himself at my feet, falling to his knees on the gravel with such force the sound echoed clearly. His suit pants tore. His knees began to bleed, but he seemed numb to the physical pain. Dad, please, he cried, his voice broken. You can't destroy my life like this. I'm your blood. Your only son. Everything I am, I owe to you. His desperation was genuine, but also pathetic. The businessmen present exchanged uncomfortable looks, disgusted. Sarah stepped between us, placing herself protectively in front of me. Dad, stop. That's enough. You can't keep manipulating Grandpa with begging after everything you've done. You don't understand, he yelled from the ground. Without the company, without the family name, I'm lost. The loan sharks aren't just going to disappear because Hedis inherited me. His words confirmed exactly what I had feared. The disinheritance didn't solve the external threat. Linda approached slowly, her face showing a new calm serenity, as if the public humiliation had somehow freed her. Michael, she said calmly, get up off the ground. Enough of the spectacle. He looked at her with desperate hope, his last possible ally. Linda, you understand. You know I can change. I can fix this if they give me a chance. But her reply was devastating in its simplicity. No, Michael, you can't fix this. And I am not going to let you destroy our children's future, too. She turned to me with dignity, despite the tears streaming silently down her cheeks. David, I want you to know I had no idea about the gambling or the threats until today. If I had known, I would have sought help immediately. I know, Linda, you are a victim in this situation, not an accomplice. For that reason, she continued, her voice firm, I have decided to separate from Michael immediately. I cannot let my children grow up in an environment of lies, dangerous debts, and family manipulation. The declaration hit Michael like lightning. He staggered to his feet, pure disbelief on his face. What are you saying? You're leaving me when I need you most? I'm leaving you because you never really needed me, she replied, with a clarity that showed she'd been thinking about this for a long time. You needed me as a facade, the respectable wife who kept up appearances while you destroyed our lives financially behind my back. Robert Sr. approached Linda discreetly. Ma'am, if you need legal support for the separation, I know lawyers who specialize in complex cases involving gambling debts and external threats. His offer was generous but also strategic. He understood his new family stability depended on resolving this crisis. The guests began to react. Some offered me and Sarah solidarity. Others just left silently. Ted, Mark, and Jack gathered in a separate group, probably discussing the business implications of being associated with this scandal. My brother-in-law Stephen approached, his face grim. David, you should consider contacting the authorities about these lenders. If they're threatening innocent family members, this is beyond a civil problem. This is criminal. He was right. Illegal gambling and loan sharking were criminal activities. Stephen, tomorrow I meet with my lawyers to evaluate all legal options. But right now, the priority is protecting Sarah, Linda, and the kids. Michael made one last desperate attempt. He approached the group of businessmen. Ted, Mark, you've known me for years. You know I'm capable. You know I can run a business. If you support me now, I can prove I deserve a second chance. But the reaction was cold and immediate. Ted physically backed away, as if Michael's proximity was contaminating. Michael, I'm sorry, but after what we heard today, We can't risk our own reputations by associating with you professionally. Mark was even more direct. Gambling and loan sharks don't mix with legitimate business. Any company that hired you would immediately become a target for those same lenders. Jack just shook his head, not even bothering to speak. The message was clear. Michael was an outcast, not just from the family, but from the entire business community. The realization of his complete isolation hit him. He collapsed again, this time onto a garden bench, covering his face with his hands. His sobs were audible, but they no longer generated sympathy, only discomfort. Sarah approached him one last time, not with compassion, but with finality. "Dad, you have two options. You can accept the consequences of your decisions with dignity, or you can keep humiliating yourself publicly without changing anything. But what you cannot do is keep hurting Grandpa or Mom with pleas that won't change their minds. Sarah, you're my daughter. Are you abandoning me too?" "I'm not abandoning you," she said sadly, but with resolution. "I'm protecting myself from you, just like Grandpa is protecting the whole family from the consequences of your mistakes." She turned to me with amateur, determined expression. "Grandpa, I think we should end this celebration. The guests have seen enough, and we all need time to process what happened." She was right. "Ladies and gentlemen, I announce to the remaining guests, I deeply regret that my granddaughter's wedding has ended this way. I thank you for your presence and your understanding in such difficult circumstances." The guests began to leave. Within 30 minutes, the garden that had been full of music and celebration was a desolate space, with only our fractured family remaining among the abandoned tables. Michael just sat on the bench, completely defeated as the sun began to set. His kingdom of lies had collapsed in a single afternoon, and the consequences would be permanent. My determination was unshakable. Some decisions, no matter how painful, are simply necessary to protect what truly matters. The following days were a whirlwind of legal paperwork, financial decisions, and a complete reorganization of my life. Monday morning, just 48 hours after the wedding, I met with Richard Miller, my trusted lawyer for 20 years, at his office downtown. Richard had heard the rumors, but when I showed him Sarah's recordings and explained Michael's conspiracy in detail, his professional expression turned to genuine shock. "David, in 30 years of family and corporate law, I have never seen a case of such systematic manipulation between direct family. The recordings are irrefutable evidence of malicious planning to defraud an estate through deceit and coercion." He put a thick folder on his desk. "I've reviewed your entire asset structure. The good news is Michael never had direct legal access to the main assets. His VP powers were limited and always required your final authorization. But I found disturbing irregularities in some secondary accounts. Over the last 8 months, small repetitive transfers were made totaling approximately $47,000. Individually, they didn't trigger alarms. But the pattern suggests systematic unauthorized extraction. The confirmation of my suspicions hurt deeply. He hadn't just planned to steal, he had already started. Richard, I want you to immediately begin all legal procedures to completely shield the assets. Irrevocable trusts, protected jurisdictions, whatever is necessary, so neither Michael nor his creditors can touch a single dollar. For the next 4 hours, we signed documents restructuring 40 years of accumulated wealth. Harrison Metals was transferred into a trust managed by a board of 3 independent professionals with specific instructions to prepare Sarah to assume total control when she turns 30. What if Michael Triesto legally contests these transfers? I asked. The recordings eliminate any chance of judicial success, Richard said confidently. We'll also establish an additional security protocol. If Michael or any persons associated with him attempt to approach you, Sarah, or the assets with threats, it will automatically trigger criminal extortion charges. On Wednesday morning, I received the visit I had been dreading, but also expecting. Michael appeared at my house, gaunt, his clothes wrinkled with several days' worth of beard. He looked like someone who hadn't slept since Sunday. Dad, we need to talk in private. We have nothing to talk about, Michael. My decision is final and irreversible. Please, he begged, 5 minutes. There are things you don't know, situations beyond what Sarah recorded. Against my better judgment, I let him into the living room. But I kept my cell phone active, discreetly recording, just as Richard advised. The lenders contacted me last night, he began without preamble. They know about the wedding, the disinheritance, everything. They said, if the family doesn't pay my debts, they will start taking direct action against the properties and against people. What kind of measures? They threatened to burn down the workshop. They also mentioned Sarah by name. They said they know where she lives with Robert. The terror in his voice seemed genuine, but I had learned to distrust anything that came out of his mouth. Michael, those threats confirm exactly why I made the right decision. Any contact you have with me or any member of this family only puts us in greater danger, but you can help me without risking anything, he exclaimed desperately. I just need $150,000 to get them off my back. It would cover the most urgent part of the debt and buy me time. I am not giving you one, Michael. And if you try to approach Sarah or Linda again looking for money, I will personally make sure the authorities know exactly where to find you. His expression changed radically. The pleading gave way to something much darker. Pure resentment and a badly hidden threat. You're going to regret this, he muttered through gritted teeth. When they start burning property, when they start hurting innocent people, you're going to remember you could have stopped it all with a simple wire transfer. Get out of my house now. This won't be your house for much longer, he replied with malice. The loan sharks already know you have properties, bank accounts, valuable assets. If I can't pay them, they'll find ways to collect directly from the family. I physically walked him to the door and shut it. His final threats confirmed the nightmare was far from over. That same afternoon, I hired private security for my house, for the workshop, and for Sarah and Robert's apartment. I also installed new alarm systems connected directly to the local police station. On Friday, Linda arrived accompanied by her 2 younger children, Emily and Daniel, 13 and 15. The kids looked confused and scared, clearly affected by the family's disintegration. David, Linda said, I came to say goodbye. I've decided to move with the children to my sister's house in Denver, at least temporarily, until this situation is resolved. It's the smartest decision, Linda. You aren't safe here, while Michael is involved with those lenders. Can we stay in touch? The children love you as their grandfather, regardless of what their father did. The request moved me deeply. Emily and Daniel were innocent victims. My love for them was unchanged, of course. In fact, I want to establish an educational fund for both of them, completely independent of anything related to their father. When they are ready for college, they won't have to worry about the costs. Linda's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. Thank you. Knowing you'll still be part of their lives gives me hope that something positive can come from this. On Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after the disastrous wedding, I made the most painful but necessary decision of all. I put my house up for sale and started looking for a smaller apartment in a different part of the city, the family home, with its 40 years of memories with Amelia. With Michael as a child, with Sarah growing up within those walls, it had been contaminated by the threats and the violence. It no longer represented security, but vulnerability. My real estate agent, surprised by the urgency of the sale, got me an excellent offer.